What is up, Maniacs? I am Zach Barger, and I am the Milly Maker Maniac. Welcome. We're doing a best ball draft today on DraftKings. We're playing their 15 million millionaire contest. um, $20 to win 2 million. You guys get to watch me build the perfect lineup today in order to build that 2 million. Not to build that 2 million, to win that 2 million. See what pick we are here. Looks like we are at the turn. We're at pick 12. So a lot of different options in this range. If any of these Jefferson, McCaffrey, Nico fall, those are definitely the guys. I need to get more Malik. I've been low on Malik compared to the rest of the guys in that range. Just think there's a lot of negative potential team outcomes for them. But he is just a stud, so I don't want to fade him completely. So he would probably be the pick there if he falls. Would be happy with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't love Henry as much on DraftKings, but a fun build that I like to do with Henry is Henry and Lamar. That had a really high advance rate last year, so it's something to look at. So I would consider that. Puka's had a pretty dramatic fall. Feels like so to me, it feels like a little bit of an overreaction to the Stafford injury. I think Puka puts up a ridiculous year. It could finish ahead of this even if Garoppolo plays, as far as where he's been drafted compared to other wide receivers. So I think that's pretty a dramatic fall. So we would definitely take Puka if he is available there at the end. And it looks like we got a good shot at him. I love building Jags and Atlanta stacks. So both Brian Thomas and Drake London are definitely in play for me as well. So we'll see how it falls and kind of decide what we're going to do as far as a build when it comes to stacks once we get our first couple guys. All right. So far, it's been Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, which is used to see a lot of Saquon Barkley at the number 2 pick, but haven't seen a lot of that lately. He's been landing more around between 4 and 7. Bijan at 3, Gibbs at 4. A little early for Gibbs. I like it, but lots of times you're seeing him go pick 5 or later. Then CD, McCaffrey, Jefferson, and Henry. Henry going very early, a little earlier than I would like. All right, Malik's gone. We still got Nico in play. So we definitely go Nico. We go Nico Puka if it fell to us like that. Is what I would do there. I think we're probably going to go wide receiver here. I've got not a ton of Genty, but I have enough of him. So, yeah, we're going to get Nico and Puka. I like that in a PPR format. All right, so now we want to build some stacks around these guys. So we'll go ahead and queue up their teammates. Hopefully I don't do what I did on a live stream yesterday where I accidentally auto-drafted Jaden Higgins in the 4th round. We do not want to do that. I'm going to queue up the Falcons here because they play the Rams in Week 17. And are the Rams. There we go. Them queued up, and we got Houston. They play the Chargers Week 17. So we'll get all these guys queued up. This doesn't mean that we're going to be drafting them in this order, but I like to know as the board falls, I'm definitely wanting to build stacks, definitely want to have correlations to my quarterbacks. So I just like being able to see where these guys that have game correlation for my studs as well as stack ability with my studs Where are they fallen? Does it make sense for me to pull them up, or does it make sense to take a different value that's not correlated, that just feels like a better pick overall, more likely to have a boom game in week 17? I don't need to go this far down, but more likely to have a week 17 boom game, or just have a really solid season. Like, obviously we want as many of those guys on our team as possible, but we know that in order to win this thing, we're going to have a huge week 17. And one of the best ways to build those boom lineups are to stack teams. Because you're looking at, the way you want to look at it is look at the different games each week. So like week 17, the couple games that we have in our week 17 is going to be Houston versus the Chargers. And with Puka, it'll be the Rams versus the Falcons. So if we visualize those games being, hitting the over on 50, like say you get like a 28-24 game, like there's 6 touchdowns in that game. So I want to chase those touchdowns. So I want to get as many pieces of that game as possible. And in those games, lots of times those quarterbacks end up being top 5 quarterbacks and they throw to their weapons, especially with pocket passes. You'll see lots of times where you'll have 3 guys top 5 at their position on one team in a shootout game. And then what happens too on that is on the comeback, on the other side, the opponent, they tend to have 1 to 2 guys in the top 10 at their position as well. So by thinking through these game scenarios and trying to stack those games, we give ourselves a much better shot of teams that aren't stacked of having that boom lineup. Because if that game goes off, we have a shot at having all the pieces you need out of that game. So with that being said, I definitely would have taken Kyron, but he just went there. I like Omari and Hampton here. I don't have a ton of him. I'd like to have more of him, so he's definitely somebody I would take here. They'd give us correlation. We lost that, didn't go there, but we would have been able to get correlation with Nico. So it's fallen a little weird here. We don't have a running back. We could go Travion Henderson here and then try to go Diggs later as well. And then we could go after a Drake Maye stack. One thing about Puka and Nico is I don't necessarily love their quarterbacks. For best ball purposes, I think they'll have decent years, but I don't see either of those guys likely to be somebody that throws 40 touchdowns this year. And I want to have quarterbacks that I think have some upside like that. So those guys aren't two of those type guys. So I would prefer to have another option at quarterback. So we'll go Travion first. We'll go ahead and cue him. Oh, God. Pull him all the way to the top, just in case. So we could go Devonta here to get that stack with Puka, which I kind of like. Devonta's fallen a decent amount, but it makes sense to take him here. Yeah, we'll go with that. Tyreek is a much riskier play. It just feels like the Dolphins thing is blowing up to me. Harrison, I don't love at this value. He could have a better year, but I just don't trust Kyler. Yeah, we're going Devonta here. So we added to one of our stacks, and then we created a new potential stack. I like Drake Maye a lot, so and I think the Patriots are going to have a much better year this year. They've got a pretty solid schedule. So I think if they are a team that, becomes an 11-win team, like all these ADPs are going to be too low. So those are the types of teams that I like to target, where if you get multiple players from that team and they have a very successful year on offense, then you're getting value at a lot of different spots. And Drake Maye too, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but he is a very mobile quarterback. A lot of projections have him in the range of 800 rushing yards if he plays all 17 games. Like, that has huge fantasy value. And I think Diggs is going to get a lot of target. They paid him to come out there even though he's older. Like, I think Drake Maye can trust where he's going to be at. Diggs is a great route runner. Has reliable hands. Like, for a young quarterback, he's going to lean on that. So I think Diggs is going to have a really solid year. Travion Henderson is going to have some massive boom games. He's an incredible athlete. He's risen up draft boards. I've been getting a lot of him all year long because I've been on Drake. But as we've gotten through training camp and he had the big plays in preseason, he's become a lot more expensive, but I still think he's a good value here because he is someone that's very explosive and has the potential for big boom games. So yeah, I like this idea of adding the Patriots here. They play the Jets in week 17. Don't really love many pieces there. This could be I actually like Braylon Allen a decent amount, and Justin Fields. This could be a good lineup for Fields. You don't need to have Fields necessarily stacked with Wilson. Wilson definitely is going to have the higher target share, but Fields is going to be one of those guys because he has so much rushing ability that you don't necessarily need to have him stacked because he can have a top 5 scoring week in fantasy and not necessarily have any teammates that are studs. Like he can have one of those weeks where he runs for 2 touchdowns and has 80 yards rushing and throws for 1. And there might be one guy that was like top 20 at his position. Maybe Garrett Wilson finishes like 15 or somewhere in that range. That's a guy you don't have to have if it's like the big boom week, as far as, having to have really high scores. So you can get away with not having that wide receiver 15 because the difference between wide receiver 15 and wide receiver like 25 is not that big. So that shouldn't be too hard to replace. So I could see going like a Patriots stack here and then having both May and Fields as our quarterbacks, and then we can get either CJ Stroud or Stafford late. So we've got 1 running back, 2 wide receivers. Guy that jumps off the board for me right here in this range, the guy that jumps off the board for me would be James Conner. He's got the Bengals in week 17. He's going to be a workhorse as long as he's healthy. I really think it's going to be Connor McBride going back and forth with big weeks. He's definitely a guy that I could see having that huge game in week 17 if he's healthy. The biggest thing with Connor is, can he stay healthy? He runs so aggressively and violently that injuries just seem to be part of his game. But I'm going to roll the dice that he has another healthy year like he did last year. And we'll get some other guys that are late season upside guys. He got taken, so we didn't get him there. So we got RJ Harvey as an option. I don't have a ton of him, but I do think that there's upside there. Not as much early season. We'd be having 2 rookie running backs, but this draft class, it's not the end of the world. So he would be my first thought here. So we'll go ahead and draft him so we don't clock out here. And then let's see, how far down is Diggs? Diggs 73. He won't get back to us. I want to get Diggs. So it's a bit of a reach, but at the corners, when you're building stacks, and I've just decided that in this lineup, I'm going to be pursuing a Patriots stack. I'm going to go get that stack because I wouldn't have got it if I would have waited to the other side. I want to go in this build. I want to build a lineup that meets the outcome of the Patriots having a top 10 fantasy offense and being a competing team. That week 17 game is huge for the playoffs. Lots of times when those are the scenarios is where you get those like late fourth quarter runs where teams are desperate and doing everything they can. They're emptying the tank to get into the playoffs. Lots of times that's where you get those back and forth games in the fourth quarter and get those huge boom weeks with a ton of fantasy points racked up in that fourth quarter as the game is going back and forth. So that's what I'm building towards, is that outcome. So with that being said, it makes sense to reach for a guy on that team that is very likely to be one of those guys that booms in that scenario in which the Patriots score 30 points in week 17, right? And have many of those weeks throughout the season. Just think they've made a lot of upgrades on the offensive line. You got Josh McDaniels in there. You got Vrabel, who's I think is just a good head coach. He seems to be a good leader. He seems to have good game clock management. He puts together a winning philosophy. So I just see a lot of positives coming out of out of New England this year, and I want to be a part of that in fantasy because I do think that there are going to be a lot of fantasy points that come out of a successful year for New England. Another thing too to consider is like their defense is going to be much better than it was last year, but it's not a great defense. They had a lot of issues last year, so they're probably going to give up points. I think they'll be much better on defense. It's one of the things that Vrabel brings to the table is helping get that defense better. But, you got the guys you got. They weren't able to completely replace everybody. There's still plenty of holes in that defense. So I could see many games that turn into shootouts late and Drake Maye running around making big plays. I want a piece of that. Okay. I think that's probably enough ranting on Drake Maye. I'm sure you have heard it on all the other podcasts and shows you're watching as well. We did get Harvey here. He's a guy, I don't love the Broncos week 17 setup. They play the Chiefs. It could be a shootout, but to me that just feels like, a late season game, probably in cold weather, probably going to be close throughout, kind of more of like a slug match type thing where it's more of a defensive battle. It's more of like who's not going to make a mistake. And in those scenarios, there doesn't tend to be massive fantasy scores. And if it is, it tends to just be from one player, maybe two. So I just don't see that as a game I really want to stack. So I've been a little lighter on both the Broncos and the Chiefs. That being said, those obviously are two solid teams with two of the best play callers in the league. So there are scenarios which it plays out. It's just not one of the more likely ones, I think. So I haven't been chasing them too much. If anybody watching works for DraftKings, this is something that needs to be fixed on. Let's lock in here on what we got coming up. So we could take Knicks here. I think I'm going to pass and just roll with the RJ Harvey solo. So we've got 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, no tight ends. Warren's really jumped up draft boards. I think I want to go Addison. He's just a guy that can have massive weeks, and they play the Lions in week 17. Yeah, we'll go there. First pick. So we got Knicks. Yeah, it's all just, I don't love any of the players stack-wise in this range. Go ahead and undo Knicks. So for me, it's coming down to either Tyler Warren or Juwan Jennings. We really don't have any correlations to Warren, but he's just, I think, just a good value here. We're just going to do that. So we'll just have him ride solo. We're not necessarily going to have to get any game correlation going there. We'll just let that play out. If we get like a Jags running back, that could have some correlation to it. I'm not going to get Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. I got a lot of Daniel Jones earlier. I just felt like this was always the outcome. So I don't think he's going to be a fantasy superstar, but he'll have some weeks that he hits the lineup. But he's not a guy that I necessarily want to build around. I have more than enough of him in other lineups, so I won't be drafting him. And obviously Richardson isn't starting. I think there's a chance that he still has value. If he plays, he's a top 10 fantasy quarterback. So that is kind of intriguing. If I miss on all my quarterbacks, that could be a consideration, is grabbing him like late, just because he has that upside of playing later in the year, and if he does play, he's going to show out. So we'll see. And there's also potential maybe he gets traded in the few weeks to come. So we would consider that as well. But right now, I think my game plan is to go hopefully Drake Maye and Justin Fields here with these next 2 picks, and then probably getting CJ Stroud later to pair up with Nico, and then we could probably add Christian Kirk or Higgins later on as well. Yeah, but as I was saying, if anybody knows anybody who works for DraftKings, this is something that needs to get fixed. And on Underdog, you can just click rank and it'll sort all these guys by their ADP. But on DraftKings, you have to do this one by one, and it is a painful process when you operate like I do when I'm trying to queue up all my stacks. So we can remove a few of these guys. We're not going to get sharp. Once I get this sorted, I'll show you guys some of the correlation charting I've done. Just very interesting to see how many weeks where you have a lot of players from one game that go off. Just very eye-opening to see. Takes a lot of obviously we want to be as informed as possible when we are building these lineups, but I think lots of times people get so caught up on each individual player. And the reality is to win this best ball tournament, the odds are really low. You got to build lineups that have high likelihoods of hitting. And if you're getting 6-7 pieces out of a game and that game goes off for 60 points, you're putting yourself in a really good spot to hit the guys that you need to have in that boom week. So I'm not as worried as a draft falls. I want to have plenty of knowledge on the players I'm taking, but I'm more, once I get my studs established, I'm more building around a game scenario, that best case scenario that could happen in week 17 and throughout the best ball playoffs. And if it plays out that way, then I have a lineup that is very likely to hit all of those guys. That's why we focus so much on the stacking. I'm more building lineups towards potential game scenarios than I am towards individual talent or their likelihood to score, to be top 5 at their position. I would much rather have, if I'm looking at wide receivers and I end up drafting, I have the choice to choose between a guy that is the number 5 receiver for the season or the guy that is number 10 receiver for the season, but he scores the most fantasy points in week 17. I want the guy that's wide receiver 10. I want the guy that is lower ranked, because when it comes down to it, he did well enough to get me to the playoffs. And then when I get to the playoffs, to the championship, he's the guy I had to have to win that $2 million. So that's how I'm thinking about it. I'm less worried about trying to build a lineup that's going to have the guys that are ranked the highest at the end of the year. And I'm trying to build a lineup that fits a game theory that could hit in week 17 and through the rest of the fantasy playoffs. So we did get our stacks. So we got both Justin Fields and Drake Maye. Justin Fields is unstacked, but there's game correlation against the Patriots in week 17. If that game is to go off, if Justin Fields is quarterback 1 in week 17, it's likely that was a back and forth game, and New England, a couple of these guys, maybe 3 of them, maybe Henderson and Diggs score 2 TDs each, and Drake Maye threw 3 of those. I guess in that case we wouldn't need Maye, but yeah, that's an outcome that could happen, and we have the guys that we would need if that game scenario played out. So when I go to, let's look at a few examples of this. This is week 10 of last year. Number 1 quarterback was Joe Burrow, had 33 fantasy points. This is PPR scoring. But Chase Brown was running back 3. Jamar Chase was wide receiver 1. That week they played the Ravens. Let me verify that. Yeah, they played the Ravens. Lamar Jackson was QB 2, and it was only a point difference, so you could have ran this different ways. But he had wide receiver 5 in Tylan Wallace, and he had tight end number 2 in Mark Andrews. So you could have, if you would have built a Joe Burrow, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, Tanner Hutt, or you wouldn't say, and then you say, yeah, the comeback you did, Mark Andrews, And Tyler Wallace obviously is a bit of a stretch, but if that was like Rashad Bateman, like that's a more likely guy to do that. But it also shows you like there is that random guy. So if you're when you're building like you're taking your later round picks, I always like to try to tie them to my quarterback, because if my quarterback goes off in week 17, there's a chance that that random guy, wide receiver 4, goes off, like we saw here in that week 10 matchup with the Bengals and the Ravens, where Tylan Wallace put up a 20 spot. He was wide receiver 5. Those are the type of scenarios that I'm thinking through. We look at every week, there's correlation between the top quarterback and his offense. But this is week 11. Jared Goff was the top quarterback. He had 2 running backs in the top 10. He had David Montgomery and Jamar Gibbs, and he had 2 wide receivers in the top 10. This is when they destroyed the Jaguars. But Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams were in there. This one didn't have any comebacks. This is one of the rare ones because they just destroyed the Jaguars. All right, so we're coming up here. Stroud would be, we'll probably take Stroud. We'll finish out our quarterback room with solid stacks. So he should fall to us here. So yeah, we would take Stroud here. Wouldn't mind taking Mooney either, but he just went. So we'll take Stroud here, and then I'm going to take Braylon Allen. That he would be running back 3, I believe. I think he's gonna get a lot of work. Did he go? Where'd he go? Oh no, here he is. He's gonna get a lot of work. It sounds like he's gonna get all of the short yardage stuff. So we got Braylon there, and we got Stroud, and that gives us really good correlation to Fields as well. One of the interesting things I found was when a quarterback is top 5 in any given week, his running back is top 10 40% of the time, which I found pretty eye-opening. I didn't think it would be that big of a number. So quarterback, running back stacks can hit quite a bit as well. Like we saw in some of the correlation I was showing you, like both weeks I showed you, you had Montgomery and Gibbs over top 10 with Goff, and you also have Chase Brown in here with Joe Burrow. And then in week 10, same thing. You had Joe with Chase. You also had Kyler with James Conner. Multiple. And I think Purdy McCaffrey is going to be a very common one this year. This is the only time it happened last year in week 10. But so definitely something to think about as you're going through these drafts. It is very likely that a QB running back stack can hit and could be the one that hits in week 17. So definitely want to get more of those stacks when possible. So let's look at our lineup so far. We got Justin Fields stacked up with Braylon Allen as our number 3 running back. Our other 2 running backs are Travion Henderson and RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey right now doesn't have any teammates or game correlation, but that's okay. We can make solo bets. It doesn't have to be every single thing has to be correlated. But we're going to want to decide which stacks we want to go with along the way. And I can also grab a few Broncos here down the stretch, maybe just another piece, just in case that game does go off. I can still have the guy that you have to have. So as we continue to go through this, we got Nico, and he's stacked up with Stroud. Obviously, that is a nice stack there. When Nico goes off, there's a good chance that Stroud comes along with him and vice versa. And we'll probably add like Christian Kirk or something later as well. We'll see. He might actually already be gone. Yeah, I think he went. So yeah, that dream's dead. But we'll see if there's somebody else to add later for Houston. Maybe like Woody Marks or even like Dameon Pierce if we want to get like real into it late. At receiver, we have the Rams stack as well. We got Puka and Devontae. We're not going to take Stafford anymore, but I like having both of those guys because if Devontae has a big week, there's weeks in which they both go off, but I think lots of times one or the other is going to go off. So we're giving ourselves a really good shot at having a top 10 receiver almost every week if these guys are healthy throughout the year. So I actually like that stack even though I'm not going to get their quarterback. Another reason like why we want to have quarterbacks with teammates is anytime you throw a touchdown to somebody on your team, that play is instantly worth 10 points, taking away any of the yardage, taking away the reception. I guess it's actually guaranteed 11 because you'll have the reception there too. So one play turns into 11 points even without any of the yardage considered. All right, let's lock in here and see what we got coming up. We could grab Henry as a backup tight end here. He would be give us more correlation with May. See other people in this range. Nobody that I feel very strongly about. So yeah, I think that Henry would be the play here. Let's see. Let's look at other. What we got wide receiver wise. We have only 5 receivers, but we got a solid 5. Okay, so we're on the clock. Go back to all. So definitely want to take Henry. We'll do that. I don't really want to do Najee. I think what I'm going to go here, I'm going to go with Hunter Henry, and I'm going to go with let's go with we could go Garindo or Algier here. They're both high-end handcuffs. Obviously, Garindo has some interest because he is behind McCaffrey, who's had injury issues. We'll go with Algier here. I'll just go ahead and click it so I don't time out. But what I was considering there, I want to have that gives us some correlation to the Rams game. So if Puka or Devontae goes off, and that game goes off, maybe Algier falls in the end zone for 2 touchdowns. But also, if Bijan was ever to go down, Algier would be insanely valuable. He's rushed for over 1,000 yards in his past. He's not nearly as explosive or elusive as Bijan is, but he's a very serviceable NFL running back. Would definitely be a top 15 running back if he was the only guy in that offense. And so when I'm at this point of the draft, I want to take shots on guys like that. Last year was kind of a outlier year for running backs staying healthy. Obviously, we had the McCaffrey injury, but it's not uncommon for 3 to 4 bell cow type guys to go down. And because of that, I want to target guys behind high volume bell cow running backs that are the clear handcuffs. Because if there were an injury, and I don't obviously like Bijan, you don't think of somebody that's injury prone at all, but when you're playing NFL running back, no matter how athletic you are, there's always a chance of injury. So it's a possibility. So I want to take that shot at getting that guy that out of nowhere becomes a top 15 asset at the position. And especially when you're getting them in round 15 that we just got. So like that, like how that's fallen. And I think Garindo is probably, if I were just in a vacuum choosing between Garindo or Algier, I think Garindo's more likely to be that guy, obviously with McCaffrey's injury history. And Garindo, there's been a lot of buzz about how explosive he is and seems to be a dependable guy. So I would lean more him even with the current shoulder injury. But with this build, it just makes sense to have a comeback against having 2 stud Rams. And I needed a running back, so it just fit the team well. So that's another thing to just be aware of. Like, how you rank guys isn't how you necessarily need to draft them. You need to look at your team and think about scenarios of the actual games themselves and how you can build to best fit that scenario that you're creating. If I'm saying that Rams-Falcons game is an absolute shootout, if it's a shootout, there's going to be fantasy points scored on both sides. So I want to have some pieces on the other side as well. And Algier isn't the most likely guy to have that boom game, but he is a guy that could. We just built a scenario in which it's like, oh yeah, it would make sense if Bijan was hurt. You could see Algier having 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's a guy that's not going to be, might not be correlated that often in stacks because he's kind of an afterthought. So definitely something to think about as you're going through the draft. All right, so we're coming up on our picks again. I actually, these top 2 guys we have queued here, I think fit the team perfectly. Quentin Johnson is actually, now I'm looking at it. The reason I would like to have a little bit of a stack back against the Texans in that game, he's a guy that he's gonna bust most weeks. He's not dependable, but he's also a guy is explosive with the ball in his hands. He can catch a drag route and take it 80 yards for a touchdown. So that is appealing. If that game goes to a shootout, he's the type of guy that could be like just out of nowhere have a big week. So that's why I'm considering him. I think I might skip Marks here. I was thinking because he would correlate to obviously to CJ Stroud, but I think I might just grab Taylor instead because that gives us a pass catcher for Fields. So yeah, we're gonna go with that. We're gonna go with Quentin Johnson, which I don't have a lot of and I don't necessarily believe in, but I also see that he's a guy that could go off in week 17 in that game that we already have a couple pieces in. So I think again, he's a guy that I have ranked lower, but it fits the build of this team. So I'm going to pursue that storyline that I'm building. That storyline of if CJ Stroud is quarterback 1 in week 17, which is one of the things we got given ourselves 3 solid shots, I think, at guys that could be QB1 in week 17 with Justin Fields, Drake Maye, and CJ Stroud. If CJ Stroud were to be that guy, you would assume that Nico Collins has a big game, which we have on our lineup here. And you would assume that somebody else on the other side, on the Chargers, could have a big game. Now, Quentin Johnson definitely isn't the most likely. Like when you think about guys, you would think about obviously Ladd McConkey, Omarion Hampton, now even Keenan Allen. Like he's low on that list, but he's the type of player that if he does get the ball 2 or 3 times, is always capable of busting a big one. Like he is a guy that you get the ball in his hands, he's good with it. He's not a great route runner and he doesn't catch the ball well. So he's not reliable. So he's not going to get a ton of volume. But when he does catch the ball and it's in his hands, he can make big plays. So that's the archetype that I'm okay with. I'm okay with a guy that's going to put up a lot of zeros, but when it matters, could out of nowhere have that big game, especially at this point in the draft where a lot of people are trying to like get guys that might hit their lineup with like a 12 or a 14 spot, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I'm not concerned about that. It's another thing that Stacks does is it gives you a pretty good floor because if you're betting on good offenses, somebody in that offense week to week is going to be solid. And if you have multiple pieces of that offense, you're likely to at least have the one that went off or somebody that's at least had a usable week. So I have multiple stacks going. So I'm giving myself a floor across the board at every position. So I'm not as worried about taking a guy that's probably going to be zeros most week and very rarely hit your lineup. Because I know that I have consistency because of how I've built my lineup. All right. So feeling good about stacks with Fields. We got Braylon Allen and Mason Taylor. With Drake, we got Henderson, Diggs, and Hunter Henry. Really like that stack. With CJ, we just have Nico, but that's okay. I wouldn't have minded getting one other pass catcher. Maybe we go get Noel here, but really, I'm good with just that being the week because it feels like if CJ goes off, Nico's gonna be there. I think that is by far the most likely. It's not like when you look at the say like the Vikings where there's been plenty of times in which Jordan Addison has been the guy you had to have and Justin Jefferson just had a decent week. I don't really see that scenario playing out for the Texans very often. It's like if a wide receiver is going to have a huge week for them, it's going to be Nico Collins. All right, coming up on our pick here. Let's look at our build so far as position. So we're good at quarterback. So we're looking either really we can go any position here. So guy jumps off the board for me, Torrey Horton. He's just getting a lot of running camp, a lot of buzz. He's gonna be a guy that runs a lot of go routes, so can always score that big touchdown. I like that. The other guy that kind of jumps off the board for me here is Taj Brooks. So obviously we don't know a lot about Taj Brooks at the moment. We haven't really seen a ton of him, but we know that he was good enough for them to let go of Zach Moss. Not that that's a huge loss by any means, but they have Samaje Perine in that backfield, but Samaje is going to have his role regardless of whether Chase Brown is healthy or not. What I think is if Chase Brown goes down, Chase Brown I think is very likely to be a top 5 running back in fantasy this year. But if he were to get hurt, which happened at the end of last year, so it's not a ridiculous thing to think, I think Taj Brooks steps into that main role that he was in, and then you just have P. Ryan doing the third down stuff and 2-minute drill type stuff. But if I could get the guy that's going to be the main running back for the Bengals in that offense down the stretch, and I can get him in the 19th round, yeah, sign me up. There's a decent chance that this is a 0 all year long and he never hits, but there is definitely an outcome in which he becomes a top 20 running back late in the season because of an injury to Chase Brown. So that's the kind of player that I'm looking for in this range. So really like how this team is building out. Let's look by position group as far as where we're at strength-wise. So we got Travion Henderson, R.J. Harvey, Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, and Taj Brooks. So we definitely have a very young backfield and a handcuff-dependent backfield. Just kind of how this one fell. We're definitely putting a lot of trust into rookies, but those are 3 of the 4 rookies that I have at the top. So yeah, I feel really good about that build. And then at quarterback, we got Justin Fields, Drake Maye, and CJ Stroud. Now, obviously, these guys aren't studs. These are all guys that are question marks, but I like Fields and Maye for their rushing ability. CJ, I don't love him, but where he's going and stack with Nico, I could see a scenario in which he throws 30 TDs, and that's hitting our lineup plenty. He doesn't have any rushing upside. He didn't really have any boom games last year. So I'm not in love with him by any means. But for our third QB, I think it's fine. And then our receiver, we're really strong at receiver. We got Nico and Puka, which could be awesome. There's plenty of scenario. There's an outcome where they're wide receiver 1 and 2. There's plenty of outcomes where they're both top 5 wide receivers. So I like that a lot. You got Devontae to paying off of Nacua, and then we got Stephon Diggs to match up with May. Jordan Addison is definitely a guy that can go boom weeks. Let me actually show you one of his weeks that he went off. I was looking at these the other day. Let's see, I think it was. I gotta find. Here, I think I can go over here actually. Just got to look at which week Addison was number 1. He was, week 12. Jordan Addison was the top scorer. Let's go look at that week. So Jordan Addison was number 1. And you see, let's see where Justin was at. Did I miss him? That doesn't look like he did much of anything that week. Maybe he was hurt, but Yeah, it just goes to show you, like, he's a guy that can be wide receiver 1. Oh, yeah, that week he did play. He was wide receiver 65. Um, so it just goes to show you, like, you want those guys that along with the studs, that can have boom weeks. Okay, so we're on the clock. I actually like taking Lambert Smith here. It gives us another Charger to go against the Texans there. We're going to want to go running back with the other pick, so we'll draft Lambert now. Now, let's go look at running back. This is our last pick of the draft. Sean Tucker's a guy that I don't mind. Jarquez Hunter, I think it's who we'll go with here. It gives us another stack with the Rams. And if Kyron will go down, I think there's a chance that he might actually be the guy. Seems to be a little bit better of a pass catcher and more explosive than Corum, according to a lot of the scouts that I've listened to, a lot of the experts. So we'll go with him. It's a bit of a long shot, but that's what we're looking for around 20. Maybe he's a guy that if they're out of it late in the season that they're trying to get a look at and getting some volume late, and injuries are always a possibility. So, yeah, like this lineup. We walked through it already, but we'll just go through Justin Fields, Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Tyler Warren, Stephon Diggs, Jordan Addison, Drake Maye, Braylon Allen, CJ Stroud, Hunter Henry, Tyler Algier, Quentin Johnson, Mason Taylor, Torrey Horton, Taj Brooks, Keandre Lambert Smith, and Jarquez Hunter. Yeah, really like that lineup. Like the stacks that we ended up with. Think it's a one that's not a lot of stacks that I don't think are going to be too common. And if those games are the ones that go off, if the Patriots-Jets game and the Texans-Chargers game and the Rams-Falcons game, if those are the games that have the most points scored in them, we got a lineup that's got a very good chance of being the winner. My friends, as always, I appreciate you tuning in. Smash that subscribe button. And thanks for watching me turn $20 into $2 million. Good luck, my friends.